Hello and welcome to my Yu-Gi-Oh channel. Be sure to subscribe for more daily Yu-Gi-Oh content. Today we're looking at some new cards that are coming out of Dawn of Majestics. The Gizmeks, which are already an archetype we've seen splashed throughout various booster packs, and now they seem to be more of an archetype as opposed to just being randomly put in different packs, and a brand new archetype itself called Sushi. So the first card is Gizmek Anaba. It's a wind attribute machine type effect monster, level 1 with 50 attack and 50 defense. You can only use this card's name's second effect once per turn. 1. When this card is normal summoned, you can special summon one machine monster from your hand, whose attack equals its own defense in defense position. 2. You can banish this card from your graveyard, then target one machine monster you control, whose attack equals its own defense. For the rest of this turn, you cannot declare attacks except with that monster. Also, its attack and defense become the total original attack of all machine monsters you currently control, whose attack equals their own defense. I think this card is very much needed for the archetype. For starters, okay, forget the stat lineup on this. It's not meant for that. It's not here for that. Its effects are fantastic. The first effect, to just special summon any of those monsters. Remember, all the Gizmeks meet this condition, so you can essentially bring out any of them with this effect. The second effect, I liken it to something like Sirocco, which is a Blackwing monster. It has the ability to take all of the Blackwings you have on the field and combine their attacks into one monster, and with the same condition to attack with only that monster. Potentially, if you can get some of the stronger ones out there, for example, Orochi has 2,950 attack. Doing that, you can boost it to a level where you can OTK your opponent, or just close out the game there, because your opponent won't have set up for the defenses to counteract this type of deck. The next card is Gizmek Anaba. It's a light attribute machine type effect monster. It's a level 2 with 950 attack and 950 defense. You can only use this card's name's first and second effects once per turn each. 1. You contribute one machine monster whose attack equals its own defense. Special summon one machine monster from your deck whose attack equals its own defense, but with a lower level than the attributed monster. 2. You can banish this card from your graveyard, add one of your face-down banished machine monsters whose attack equals its own defense to your hand. Again, this is a fantastic card and very much necessary for the Gizmek archetype. For starters, forget the fact it has very minimal attack. Here's with the effect. The first one lets you just bring out a lower level monster, so if you've got some of the higher ones, maybe you want certain effects out, so you're able to do that, and since it gets those monsters from the deck rather than from your hand, it gives you a lot of variety, because say you get rid of your Orochi, you've got all those monsters below level 8 that you can access. As for the second effect, this is really, really good. Traditionally, in early forms of Yu-Gi-Oh!, banishing was the means of, preventing you or your opponent from accessing your cards back. But with the whole power creep mechanics and being able to recover with things like Escape from Dark Dimension and being able to just revive those cards, that's become very much a feature of something you can do very easily. And then there becomes this whole mechanic of removing things face down so that you can't bring them back. With this effect, that essentially gets rid of that downside to be able to do whatever you like with that level of power. It does require it to be just a banished machine monster, and it has to have the same attack and defense, but all of your Gizmek monsters meet this requirement anyway, so you have the ability to just recover those monsters and recycle them. Gizmek Taneguku is an Earth attribute machine type effect monster. It's a level 3 with 1,450 attack and 1,450 defense. You can only use this card's name's first and second effects once per turn each. 1. If this card is normal or special summoned, you can place one machine type monster from your deck whose attack equals its own defense on the top of your deck. 2. You can banish this card from your graveyard, then target one machine monster in your graveyard whose attack equals its own defense, and special summon it in defense position. And that, again, it's a really good card. The first effect just lets you top deck a machine type monster, so that will be another one of Gizmeks. You know what you're going to draw into next rather than drawing into some random card. And I'm sure there are ways that you can actually special summon or access that monster in some kind of support later on. The secondary effect is also quite decent. Since your monsters have a balanced attack and defense, really special summoning it in defense position isn't a problem. The only thing I would say which would be a downside is that means during that turn you can't use it to attack. But if you've got spell or trap cards that can switch battle modes, then that can be dealt with anyway. Gizmek Mikubuki is a water attribute machine type effect monster. It's level 4 with 1850 attack and 1850 defense. You can only use this card's name's first and second effects once per turn each. 1. If you control a machine monster whose attack equals its own defense, you can special summon this card from your hand. 2. You can banish this card from your graveyard, then target one machine monster you control whose attack equals its own defense. Send one machine monster whose attack equals its own defense, but with a lower level than that target, from your deck to your graveyard. And if you do, that target gains attack and defense equal to the sent monster's level times 100. So this is, I would have to say, out of the various support that I've just listed, even though this is the strongest in its stat lineup, I would say it's got the weakest effects to it. The first part of the effect, just special summon itself, it's not really that big of a deal. So many monsters can do that. Fewer conditions attached to them. Some of them can just arbitrarily just special summon themselves. The secondary effect, I think, is really, it's not that good. If you look at how the Gizmeks are, you've got monsters from level 1, I think, all the way up to level 8. So assuming you've got your level 8 and you've just sent a card that's the level 7 to the graveyard, it gains a 700 attack and defense stat increase. And remember, this has to happen on your turn. It would have been slightly better if it had been a quick effect, but not very much. It's probably the least impressive of any of them. Okay, so we have the arbitrary field spell. This is Gizmek legend Kamitsukawashiime-no-Kikie. You can only use this card's name's first effect once per turn. 1. During your main phase, you can excavate the top 3 cards of your deck, and if you do, you can add 1 excavated machine monster whose attack equals its own defense to your hand. Also banish the rest face down. Each time a machine-type monster whose attack equals its own defense is normal or special summoned, place 1 counter on this card. And 3. Monsters on the field whose attack does not equal its own defense cannot activate their effects while this card has 10 or more counters. Okay, so I've got to say this is a very interesting card and actually works with how the theme of the Gizmeks kind of rely upon each other. The first effect, you can use that once a turn, you can excavate your deck, and then you can just search for these Gizmeks as you go through them. Of course, you're banishing 2 of those cards, but remember, with the level 2 Gizmek, it's able to recover those monsters anyway, so it's not really that big of a downside. The secondary ability does require you to kind of develop all these counters, so you are going to have to summon multiple times. It's not going to just get these counters instantly, which I think is a massive problem. It would have been nice if it had also been if those cards had been destroyed by battle or card effect, just to rack up the counters. But I suppose from that point they didn't want to make this too overpowered. But the third effect is the nice icing, it's the cherry on top. The ability to shut down your opponent's abilities is fantastic, considering if you're running a pure Gizmek deck, you're not going to have any monsters that don't meet this protection condition anyway. So it's only really going to affect your opponent. Even if you are running some random monsters, depending on how you're running them, it's not going to make that big of a difference during the early game if you don't have the counters to match the requirement. I do wish it would have some kind of protection for itself, because it still is very susceptible to just basic spell trap and monster effect destruction or effect negation. If that had been introduced as well as part of the effect, I would say it would be a little bit stronger. Okay, so now we're going to have a look at the Sushi, which is the Sushi Archetype. First one is Rice Sushi. This is a fire attribute aqua type normal monster. It's a level 4 with 2000 attack and 0 defense. It being a vanilla monster just has a flavor text to it, so we'll just have a read. In a certain Sushi port in which I've been interested for a while, there is a rice sushi of which only 2,000 vessels a year are produced, with a self-developed old rice that is not too sticky, with a profound taste that cannot be enjoyed in any other ports, of which many critics have heavily acclaimed. The interior of the harbour is of high status, making one's heart beat with excitement. As for the sought-after sushi, despite the vinegar concentration, grasping technique, and modelling worthy of a craftsman, there was still something that wasn't quite right, wasn't quite there. Thus, the store owner speaks a red vinegar made in Edo font that will add a mellow and rich fragrance will be arriving to the port in the upcoming days. And from hearing that, I'm looking forward to this edition. It is unfortunate that the surrounding sea area was somewhat noisy. It is with great expectation of a future visit that I'm grading it with 4 stars. It's just a little bit of a pun. It's a nice flavour text to kind of show the tradition that obviously Konami being a Japanese company and they're being very much into both their sushi and their rice. It's quite nice, and also the 4-star thing is to do with menus and how quality is assessed within various countries. Roe-class is a fire attribute archetype effect monster. It's a level 4 with 200 attack and 300 defense. You can only special summon the way of this card's name's first effect once per turn. You can only use this card's name's second effect once per turn. 1, if you control Roe-class, you can special summon this card from your hand. 2, during your main phase, you can excavate the top 3 cards of your deck, and if you do, you can add to your hand or special summon 1 excavated Roe-class. Also shuffle the rest back into the deck. Okay, so this just seems like generic special summon for level 4 monsters. It does special summon itself if you've got the Roe-class out there, but that's not really that big of an effect. Lots of monsters can do that if they've got other monsters on the field, or vice versa, or special summon from the graveyard. So it's not that big of a deal. The secondary effect to be able to excavate to just special summon a Roe-class just screams of just summoning rank 4 monsters. Speaking of which, that's what we've got coming next. So this is Dreadnought Sushi Roe-class First Wildish. It's a fire attribute archetype. Exceeds monster is rank 4 with 2200 attack and 300 defense. It requires just 2 level 4 monsters. You can only use this card's name's first effect once per turn. 1, if this card is Exceed summoned, you can apply these effects based on the monsters used as material. If it's a Roe-class, you draw 1 card. If it's a Roe-class, this card can make a second attack during each battle phase. The second ability, once per turn when your sushi monster, special summon from the extra deck, inflicts battle damage to your opponent, you can target 1 card they control and destroy it. Now, what do I think of this effect? It's really difficult and challenging. Had this come out when Zeal initially came out, then I would say it's okay. The level of power creep means this, as an Exceed monster, is going to be very easily forgotten. The novelty comes from the fact that it's a fire attribute and an archetype. You don't really see that combo that often. You see that from things like Firecracken, which they mentioned is the first example of that. And that was introduced so many years ago within the beginnings of Yu-Gi-Oh! That it's a very forgotten card for some of the newer players. You probably have loads of these cards as commons. The first part of the effect, to draw a card and have it attack twice, is fine, but for a 2200 attack monster, it's not particularly threatening. The secondary ability is decent because it does provide some form of destruction, but many of your opponent's monsters will have destruction protection effects, or be able to dodge it in some way, or just get rid of this card before it becomes a problem. It would have been much better had it been able to send a card to the graveyard rather than destroy, because most cards don't have reaction effects to that, whereas those that can be destroyed and then can trigger effects to float into other cards, all you're doing is essentially extending your opponent's combos, and that's something you never want to do. Sushi Galley Kaizen is the field spell. Its first effect is once per turn if you normal or special summon a Sushi monster, even during the damage step, you can place 1 Sushi card from your deck on the top of your deck. 2, once per turn if your Sushi monster's special summon from the extra deck is sent to the graveyard by an opponent's card, your opponent must pay life points equal to its defense. Then you can special summon 1 Rice Sushi from your hand, and if you do immediately after this effect resolves, Exceed summon 1 Sushi Exceed monster using only that monster as material. Right, so the first effect of this card just lets you top deck 1 of the Sushi monsters. It just helps to trigger the effect of the Roe-class to be able to excavate and guarantee that you're going to excavate the relevant card. That's its purpose. The secondary ability is also quite bizarre. If your Sous Ship monster ends up in the graveyard, then your opponent is burned for 300 points of damage. It's so forgettable, it's just a useless card. I wouldn't consider even running it. Even, special summoning into another Sous Ship monster is just not a worthwhile effect. Had they had more Exceeds monsters that are Sous Ships, then if they had been more relevant and stronger, I would say this is definitely worth running. But as it is, it's very much deemed as a forgettable archetype. Hopefully in the future they will consider running more, but we just kind of have to wait on that news. And here's the final card. This is Sous Ship Roll Specials. It's a normal trap card with the effect, when you activate this card, you can also reveal one Rice Sous Ship in your hand. 1. Reveal 3 Sous Ship monsters from your deck. Your opponent picks one for you to add to your hand. Also shuffle the rest back into the deck. If you revealed a Rice Sous Ship when you activated this card, you choose instead. 2. If this card is in your graveyard, except the turn it was sent there, you can banish this card and target 3 Sous Ship monsters in your graveyard, shuffle them into the deck, then you draw one card. This is also a very bizarre card because essentially you're letting your opponents just search for your cards and let you pick for them. Even if you're doing this yourself, it's not relevant. It's not going to extend your combos. It's not going to get you into a good place. It's a very weak trap card. Even the secondary ability just to be able to return your Sous Ships back into the deck to draw an additional card. I don't think this should have been, except the turn it was sent to the graveyard. I mean, it's not a powerful effect anyway, and just combining the two effects is just very bizarre. I'd love for them to get some real support maybe later on. Remember, you've got some archetypes, I think with the Magic Key archetype, that they've hidden cards deliberately. I'm hoping this is receiving the same treatment, because otherwise this is just going to be clearly forgotten about.